For those who have never heard of Mr. Bob Lazar, this brief overview of his incredible revelations will pique your interest. In interviews Bob gave in 1989, he claimed that he worked as a scientist at a location known as S4, a top-secret US government location attached to the infamous Area 51 at Groom Lake. He also gave detailed descriptions of the site and the work he did there, and revealed that there were 9 out-of-this-world crafts housed at the site, stored in hangars cut into the side of the mountain. These crafts were powered by an advanced propulsion system that was fueled by the as-of-yet undiscovered Element 115 and was used to generate gravity waves. He went on to explain that at first he believed the crafts to be super-secret military experiments, but soon realised that they were something else. They were flying saucers. Bob also claimed that as soon as he arrived at the base, he was instructed to read 121 classified US government briefing documents that described alien involvement in human affairs over the past 10,000 years, and saw photographs of alien autopsy. As a direct result of Lazar's interview, the Area 51 site and the unknown S4 site was brought to the public's attention. You've heard of Area 51, and that's because of Bob. Since the interviews, however, Bob Lazar has remained relatively silent, and over the years he's been ridiculed and discredited by skeptics, with some claiming he is a fraud. When his scientific credentials could not be verified, many cast doubt on his extraordinary claims. But now, 30 years later, Bob Lazar has resurfaced, and is the subject of an upcoming film titled Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. In the film, he again sticks to his original claims, and our good friend and filmmaker Jeremy Corbell tries to finally put the skeptics to the test with some new and compelling evidence that could finally prove Bob Lazar is telling the truth. Here we look at 5 of Bob's claims and question how he knew some of the things he did if he wasn't actually part of them. You're in for a good one, so sit back and enjoy. S4. Lazar goes into great detail about S4, the previously unknown base located just off Papoose Dry Lake bed, located in Lincoln County, Nevada. The lake lies within the plot of land referred to as Area 51, a highly restricted military area. He said that S4 consisted of 9 hangars with sloping doors. Inside each hangar was a craft, although he didn't work on them all, as despite having a majestic security pass, the highest there is, he was still restricted to certain areas, and was accompanied by someone wherever he went inside the base. The project he was brought in to work on was known as Galileo, and S4 had been specifically built to store UFOs as Area 51 didn't have clearance to deal with them. He described the base as looking new, possibly less than 10 years old, and at the opposite end of the hangars was the staff entrance, which could only be entered after a sophisticated hand scanner security check. Inside the complex were offices, labs, and the back entrance to the hangars. When asked if he thought there was an underground facility there, he thought not, but it was a possibility. This detailed description of the facility, that no one had ever heard of before, prompted many to try and discredit Lazar's claims that it existed at all. After all, it wasn't in any publication and had never been mentioned anywhere before. But his claims were vindicated when George Knapp, the investigative reporter, who was one of the first to interview Bob, did his own research and personally got the public relations from the base to acknowledge that there was indeed a classified sub-facility to Area 51 called S4 that was used for classified projects. This information and verification of the existence of S4 poses the question: if Bob wasn't telling the truth, how would he have known about this top-secret base before it was ever made public, let alone be able to describe it in such detail? Test flights. Lazar claims that he first witnessed an unusual craft the 3rd time he went to S4, and initially he thought it must be a new fighter the government had been working on, and it didn't immediately occur to him that it was an ET craft. He described it as round, like your typical flying saucer, and made of some kind of metal, but completely seamless with no apparent joints. But it was when he looked inside it that he realised that it was not made by or for humans. It was obviously designed for something much smaller than any human being. His job was to back-engineer the craft, in other words, find out how it was built and whether man could duplicate it using earthly materials. Lazar said he witnessed one of the crafts take off after it had been adapted for humans, and was amazed when it lifted off the ground and was completely silent. How a 52-foot diameter metal craft could lift off in complete silence was incomprehensible. Lazar was also privy to the days, times, and places that flying discs were tested. These tests were carried out over Papoose Lake, not over the more obvious Area 51. An interesting note is that Papoose Lake was also unheard of until Lazar went public. The tests were done on Wednesday nights because, statistically, it was the night of least traffic in the area. They were never done on the weekend, mainly due to the fact that on Friday nights everyone leaves the base and only minimal crew are left. On 3 occasions, apparently Lazar invited a few friends out to show them the test flights, but one night they were caught and the whole test was cancelled. Lazar was severely reprimanded for this security breach and was taken into a room and questioned. He also claims that at one point during the interrogation, a gun was pulled on him. Shortly after the incident, Bob left the project. Take a look at the actual footage caught on camera from one of these 5 occasions that Bob took people out to see the craft fly. You have to bear in mind that this footage was taken in the 1980s and at night with no light source, but what they caught was unlike anything any of them had ever seen before, and its movements were unlike any aviation craft that was known. One of the witnesses was John Lear, who at the time was one of the most experienced pilots on the planet. Take a look.
Good evening, this is John Lear, and today is March 22nd, 1989. We're standing just about 8 miles due east of Groom Lake, Nevada, the super government secret test site. And just a few minutes ago, we saw one of the government extraterrestrial UFOs fly over there. We all watched it for about 7 or 8 minutes. Right here I have my Celestron scope. It's 8 inches. And I had it focused in for about 15 seconds and saw for myself that in fact it was a disc. We're going to stay here for another couple hours here to see if we can show you folks an actual extraterrestrial flying saucer being flown by the government. So if you just stand by, and we'll be looking over that mountain, which is where they are. They also come over here, which is over at Bald Mountain. There's some lights over there which you can't see, but there are a number of trucks. We don't know whether they're looking down here or what they're doing up there, but we managed to get in here. We're standing on public land. It's completely legal where we are. And if you'd like to come here later in the show, we'll tell you exactly how to get here.
Well, you can mention who's with you, John.
We have Bob Lazar, and we have Jackie Lazar, Bob's wife, and we have Gene Huff. And this mission was organized tonight by Bob Lazar, who is a theoretical physicist who works at Groom Lake.
And is also a dead man at this point. We're having this on film that he wrote.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Good luck.
No, what? Did you see that move it did?
No, I didn't.
It went like it went boom, boom. Wow, look how bright it's getting.
Look at it now.
It's getting bright.
Not bright enough for me to get the son of a bitch.
Here, hold on, right here.
Are you there? No.
It is bright right now.
The question is, how did he know the exact time and date of these test flights, and the fact that they were conducted over the previously unknown Papoose Lake? Just a lucky guess, or did he have this knowledge because he worked at the base and his claims are true? Mike Thigpen. George Knapp, one of the journalists who interviewed Lazar in 1989, and is in the new Bob Lazar movie, is sure to this day that he was telling the truth, and claims much of his story checks out. He even arranged for Lazar to undergo 4 polygraph tests, all of which confirmed he was telling the truth. But there is another piece of the story that presents strong evidence that Lazar is genuine. It involves a man named Mike Thigpen, a man that had visited Lazar's home back in 1988 and interviewed him in connection with his employment. Knapp acted on this information and contacted the Department of Energy, who confirmed that the Office of Federal Investigations, whose phone number is not even listed in the Las Vegas phone books, performs background checks on people who get clearance to work at the Nevada test site. They confirmed Thigpen worked for the Office of Federal Investigations, but they wouldn't confirm anything else and pretty much hung up on him. But after 30 years, Jeremy Corbell was able to track down Mike Thigpen as part of his research into the making of his film, and he spoke to him on multiple occasions. Although he was unwilling to appear in the film, he did confirm that his job back then was to do clearance checks. He also admitted that he remembered Bob Lazar. So how did Lazar know that Thigpen did background checks all those years before, if he himself hadn't had them done? A crazy coincidence, or could it be that he had met Thigpen as part of his own clearance check, and once again, Bob Lazar was telling the truth? Government agents, why, if it was not true? In his interviews, Lazar alluded to the fact that he may have kept a small quantity of element 115 in his possession, although when asked directly in 1989, he replied with no comment. However, he did reveal that at the time he worked at S4, the base was in possession of about 500 pounds of element 115. When Bob left the project after about 6 months, he claims he was constantly harassed. His house was broken into, he and his wife were threatened, his car was broken into, and he received strange, anonymous phone calls. He also always insisted he only went public with his claims because he was in fear of his life, and figured that if he was killed after he exposed what was going on, it would validate what he was saying, so believed that wouldn't happen. Although in hindsight, he has always said he wished he kept quiet. But it could have backfired because he also revealed that as soon as he went public with his revelations, he had an encounter when a white car pulled up and shot out the back of his car. He couldn't confirm whether it was a government official, but it did seem a strange coincidence. After he left the base, he had little contact with any of his former employees, apart from Dennis, his supervisor, the guy whose name he used in his very first anonymous interview. He arranged to meet with him one time at the Union Plaza Hotel. But when he arrived, Dennis was there with security personnel from S4, and Bob felt something wasn't right and made a swift exit. At the time, it was speculated that the real reason government agents were pursuing him was that they believed he might be in possession of a quantity of element 115. This was somewhat confirmed 30 years later, when during the making of Jeremy Corbell's film, Lazar was again asked the question, "Did you ever get a piece of element 115? The answer he gave was encrypted in the film, but something happened the next day, as you will see in the movie. A dramatic series of events that proves that Lazar is not free from government surveillance, even today. The question is, why would the government agencies be interested in Lazar if he was telling a pack of lies? Why would they waste their time on someone if they thought it was a hoax? And is the crucial part of this story the possibility that Bob Lazar is still in possession of a small quantity of element 115, a substance that he claims could have been brought to the base by aliens? Is that the real reason the government agents kept him under such close observation? Gravity waves. We mentioned this one in our element 115 video, but it's such a strong suggestion that Lazar is telling the truth that we couldn't not include it. Back in 1989, Bob Lazar claimed in his interview with George Knapp that the flying saucers he was studying at S4 used gravity waves powered by an antimatter generator based on element 115. Both gravity waves and element 115 were unknown at the time. It was over a decade later, in 2003, that an unstable isotope of 115 was first created in a lab. And it wasn't until December of 2015 that it was officially added to the table of periodic elements as unum pentium. And while the existence of gravity waves has been talked about as far back as Albert Einstein, they were not scientifically observed and measured until 2015. So how could Lazar explain in incredibly great detail the gravity wave propulsion technology used to propel the flying saucers he studied at S4? Do these fairly recent discoveries finally vindicate what Lazar was telling everyone in 1989? As you know, we like you to make up your own minds about whether the stuff we bring you is authentic or not. In the case of Bob Lazar, there are so many things that point to him telling the truth, despite his claim on the surface sounding so out of this world. But you can't help but wonder whether he was used as a part of a disinformation exercise, Was he specifically chosen by the government to work on this project, and then harassed into going public to save his life? After all, he wasn't the most obvious choice to be given such a highly classified job. There were far more qualified scientists around at the time that should have been picked before him. Lazar himself admits that. And was it the government that erased all knowledge of his schooling and qualification, which is clearly what seems to have happened, so that when he did go public, they could immediately discredit him? Was Bob Lazar used to conceal the truth and distract attention away from what was really going on at S4? Since you've watched this video, history has been made within the UFO community. Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers is now available. For the first time in over 30 years, you can hear what's being hidden from us from the man himself. Bob Lazar is back.